As the U.S. Army continues to modernize and address how we are going to fight moving forward by formation, we look forward to hearing what the Army of 2030 may look like as we attempt to address .mil PFP gaps and mitigation measures. I'm Colonel Neil Myers, commander of the 199th Infantry Brigade, and it is my privilege to introduce our next two guest speakers who have a combined total military service of over 68 years and are considered experts in our profession. Lieutenant General Beagle is the commanding general of the Combined Arms Center. He has served in numerous command and staff positions over his 33-year career, including overseas and combat deployments in Korea, Kuwait, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Lieutenant General Matlock is the Department of the Army Deputy Chief of Staff G-357. He has served in numerous command and staff positions over his 35-year career, including overseas and combat deployments to Korea, Saudi Arabia, Germany, Kuwait, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Major General Buzzard, Command Sergeant Major Dotson, and the entire Maneuver Center of Excellence, please join me in welcoming Lieutenant General Milford Beagle and Lieutenant General Patrick Matlock, who is joining us online.
All right, hey, good morning, team. Patrick, can you hear me?
Please, yeah, I can, and please start, and I'll take it wherever you cue me off to.
I was going to let you cue me off. We got the whole live virtual going. All we need now is constructive. So to the senior, to the elder, I'll defer to you, my friend, the great G3.
Okay, thanks. Hey, I was with the group yesterday and appreciated the opportunity to hear both the leaders speaking and the questions and answers. And I appreciated the sidebar conversations in the hallways and other things. Great to see lots of old friends and meet new people as well. And then I was able to hear General Rainey and his sergeant major's presentation just now too. So I'll try to tailor my comments to a number of issues that they've raised. Let me say up front, it's important in General Beagle and I briefed together. We look for opportunities to stand on the stage together. We're doing a little bit different today because the working relationship between CAC and all of the centers of excellence and the proponents and the Army G3 and the processes that we use here inside headquarters DA to deliver capabilities is one of the most important relationships in the Army, even if it's not really well known by lots of people in the Army. So this is really important visual presentation of the teamwork that General Beagle and I try to achieve every single day. So I'll start off with just a couple of broad comments and then I'll hand it over to General Beagle. If you go to the first slide, it should say Purpose of Army 2030. You've heard our senior leaders put a lot of what we're doing in context of the National Defense Strategy and the other documents that drive. So let me just make a couple points. I say it this way: we are very much learning to be an Army that is now largely stationed in the continental United States, and number two is conducting a very robust rotational and exercise program in our theater armies. And that's new. That's different than it was 40 years ago when we were a forward-based Army and the theater armies were prioritized and built out, principally Europe, but also the Pacific. So it's a different model that we have. And in your world, at your echelons, that means you're going to be doing the training programs at home station, and then you're going to be fully employed in the exercise and rotational program for the combatant commands and the theater armies. Next slide, please. So you've heard a lot about the adjustments that we're going through now. So I'll very briefly touch on this slide. We are an Army that's learning to prioritize in accordance with the NDS, which puts the homeland and then the Pacific at the number one and number two priorities in the United States Army. Number three is Europe. I've made comments in other venues where our history and our DNA, if you want to use that term, lends us to be more comfortable to going to Europe. We're learning about the Pacific and we're learning to be comfortable operating in the Pacific. I thought General Flynn's presentation yesterday was absolutely superb. And even just a few seconds of staring at that map, you realize the tyranny of distance that is present in the Pacific. And then more importantly, the range and the complexity of the relationships in the Pacific is very, very diverse. Let me move on to the next slide, and I want to talk about the Army of 2030 and spend a little bit of time on my role, and then I'll hand it over to General Beagle, who will expand on the Army of 2030 and the delivery of the Army of 2030. My role here in the building, we've got these great Army commanders of our Army Commands, Futures Command, Training and Doctrine Command, Forces Command, and Army Materiel Command, who drive that intellectual space of how the Army is going to operate, what the future is going to look like, what the doctrinal baseline of our Army is through Training and Doctrine Command, and all of those ideas are built out in their processes. Those things come into the headquarters DA. They really come into General Beagle's team and my team about the same simultaneously. And we put all of those things into the practical business of delivering capabilities inside of your formations. And it's, I'm not going to spend time talking about dollars and people, but at the end of the day, we take a limited set of resources, people, money, and equipment, and we deliver it into the right place at the right time in order to put capabilities inside of your kit. Everything from the new rifles and all the supporting equipment, all the way up to the most capable theater level capabilities, the most modern theater level capabilities that we have. So we've got in the upper left there the driving documents. In the lower left, we've got the basic idea that's encapsulated in the National Defense Strategy. In the middle are the means that we're going to deliver, which are the theaters, theater level capabilities with the MDPFs highlighted, the corps and the divisions and the priority brigades. Not that the rest of the Army is not going to be modernized over time, but that is currently our focus area that's listed there in the middle. And then over on the upper right, we've got the Secretary's operational imperatives. And I think of those as the yardsticks by which we measure the success of our delivery. Can we do those things effectively in the joint and combined arms fight where we're going to execute? And then on the lower right, you see the people investments and the material investments that we're making for the future force. I'll come back to a few ideas on this chart as I make my final comments, but let me turn it over to General Beagle, and then he can take it from there. Over.
All right. Hey, thanks, Patrick. Could we just hold on that slide? Go back real quick. You revealed the secret, because that was going to be my apology up front. I have two slides. They are eye-teasing slides, not eye-pleasing slides. I will tell you that right off the bat. I think my task this morning is to answer two questions. How do we deliver the Army of 2030, and how does the Army of 2030 fight? That is a goal. But when you think about the Army of 2030, it is a point along the journey. The true destination is actually the Army of 2040. General Rainey was just up here, but it's really about the destination at the very end, 2040. So what are we doing with 2030? It's about organizational change. Someone once told me, if you can't explain something in 8 to 10 words, then you really don't understand it. So I'm going to explain to you in about 8 to 10 words the Army of 2030. It is fundamentally about organizational change, underpinned by a profound doctrinal concept, calibrated for large-scale combat operations. So now, hopefully you wrote that down. Don't ask me to say it again. But I'll break that down for you, but that's essentially what it is. You heard General Flynn talk yesterday about organizational change, and we'll talk .mil-PFP, get a little bit into that, but that's really what it's about. That profound doctrinal concept, that is our operations, FM30, that concept, multi-domain operations, and it's pretty profound when you think how we will have to fight large scale, and large scale, take it in context of what it is, in the joint perspective, extensive joint operations, based on the size, the scale, and the scope of the forces committed. And what are those forces going to do? They're going to be out achieving or conducting campaigns in order to achieve objectives at the operational and strategic level. That's what large-scale combat is in that multi-domain environment, given this 5 domains and its 3 dimensions. So if you go to the next slide, and again, I don't want your eyeballs to dance all over the slide. Patrick, the G3 has covered pretty much what you saw on the left when we talk about, our 3 priority theaters, the 5 multi-domain task forces, the 4 corps, and then so on and so forth with your brigades and your priority divisions. And you think at echelon. The Vice talked about at echelon. Our Army's secret sauce is we buy things, as General Flynn talked about, bent metal, we buy things, we fight formations at echelons. No other Army on this planet fights at echelon the way we do. You can't take a brigade from one division, put it in another division, put it in a different theater, and it still fights. It's how our entire system and enterprise works. Out of here, we'll produce a lieutenant, or a platoon leader. We inherited a lieutenant from ROTC. You produce a platoon leader, and you put that platoon leader into a formation. And that formation can go anywhere, be plugged in any part of our enterprise at echelon and go fight. That is what we do. That is our secret sauce. But how do we deliver the Army of 2030? There's this thing we call .MLPFP. For those that don't know that acronym, Doctrine, Organization, Training, Material, Leader Development, Education, Personnel, Facilities, and Policy. That's what we do. That's what the G3 and I do together. We do it on behalf of TRADOC from my position, and we work very closely with Army Futures Command. I like to tell people I have 2 bosses, so I'm a very confused 3-star general. You have a foot in the field at force, and you have a foot in the future force. That's what we do in bringing those things together. Because our readiness at the end of the day is not, our readiness is about what we have, not what we don't have, right? Things that we'll bring online in terms of how we integrate them into our force, that's about what we want to have and how we want to fight. But how do we do that now with the force that we have, and how do we make that transition? That's the point you hear everybody talk about transformation. The key thing here is really everything on the right side. General Flynn said it yesterday. If you heard him, he mentioned a date, 2027. The PLA has already said where they're going to be in 2027. So as we look at 2030, we know all the signature modernization efforts that are out there, all of what we call force design updates. How do we change organization? There's over 40 force design updates that are out there that are not fully in place yet. There are over 30 signature modernization efforts that have not come into fruition. Some will come into fruition after 2030. So how do we set ourselves? How do we know that we're on firm ground with regard to being postured for 2030? We have to go a little bit left. So on this, we indicate what we call an azimuth checkpoint to see. Are we really on the glide path to be where we need to be, not only for 2030, but we've set conditions and not gotten too far off course with regard to 2040. Because we'll create landing spots for certain things down the road in the Army of 2040, the Army that many of you further back will inherit over time. So these are what we call Tier 1 tasks. It's just like your typical logic chart or your critical path. What is the first things you need to do? What things need to be set? I like to call it a stance. What is your stance going to be? It has to be pretty firm, and our stance has to be pretty firm by 2026 in order to get to where we need to be in 2030 and then down the road in 2040. But through .MLPFP, this is how the Army makes things real. When we talk about making things real in our Army, this is how we do it. We change an organization, we change our doctrine, we do our leader development and our training, link to that doctrine, link to that profound concept, and then we change, we transform. We go from one state to the next. If I pull the string on this, and the Tier 1 that you see represented here have many tiers behind it. We've done this, sourced this, discussed it, talked about it to make sure we've got it right. It's not perfect, but as we screen to get in what's up here is our Tier 1 level task, there's several screening criteria. Does it support the Army of 2030? It's a direct tie to the man, train, and equip of the formations of Army of 2030. There are directed requirements. General Rainey stood up here as one of the senior leaders that will put out a directed requirement. What is the directed requirement? There's some piece of kit, there's some change in operating environment that we need like right now. So he'll direct that requirement, or the chief or the secretary will direct those requirements. If it supports that, it makes the cut, something that we have to have. And if there's any changes in our national strategy, we have to be agile enough to make those adjustments. But to pull the string on just one of the domains of .MLPFP training, we were talking combat training centers earlier this morning. So our training centers have to be set prior to 2030. So as we see the signature modernization efforts come online, we make the organizational changes that we need, as we're doing the right leader development and training, as you come out of schools and courses, functional courses as well, have we done the right things there? And we send you to the dirt environment of a CTC, does all that come together? but our CTCs have to be set first. They have to be modernized. They need to have what they need in order to make all of this work with regard to the concept, leader development that will happen when you're out, whether it be at a CTC or a warfighter or at a home station training. Those things have to be set first. That is an example of a tier 1, and that is all the way throughout. People is another good example up here. What are the MOSs that we need? I think General Rainey said it when he was up here, 14 series in terms of protection, right? Knowing how we prioritize what MOS is going to be critical in what formations, where do we insert them, and where do we get them in terms of the formations that we have in order for them to fight at echelon. So those are all the points I'll make on this slide. We'll go to the next one. This is really going to make your eyeballs flip over, but it's very simple, right? I said eye teasing, not eye pleasing, okay? I'll start with the middle because I know your eyes are going to gravitate there first. When we think about large-scale combat, we think about the gaps and how we got here, starts back in 2017. 20 years of counterinsurgency, and we looked at our army and looked at things that are happening in Nagorno-Karabakh, the first incursion of Russia to Crimea, and go, okay, if we were to fight at that large scale, where are the gaps in our army? And it produced a list of 17 gaps. So when you hear the term large-scale combat operation gaps, it was those gaps. There are things that we know we could not do at echelon because that's how we fight. As I pointed out earlier, we've got to close some of those gaps. And as the concept evolved into multi-domain operations, you lay that over one theater, what you see on the right, think Europe, a contiguous environment. And in some cases, we will support the joint force. In some cases, we will be supported by the joint force. So in contiguous environment, it looks pretty clean. That looks complicated up there, but you're talking deep sensing, you're talking close combat forces, the things that you will need to fight in that contiguous environment. As General Flynn talked yesterday, as we continue to evolve the concept and look at it closer, look at the formations, now it looks a little bit different because you're talking scale, you're talking distance, you're talking time. So protection means something different. Sustainment means something different, just simply because of the theater that you're in. And we're already learning those things. As we continue to exercise, do experiments, those things are folded into how do we adjust. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to create a broken icon. So as I talk about icons, now you go to the top. Those are the echelons in which we fight. Theater level being the most complex when you think about our theater armies and what they have to do. A joint task force, a joint force land component command, an ASCC, Army Service Component Command, and many other roles and functions. They're not only an echelon, they're a formation. So what are we doing with regard to Army of 2030? Just so you can follow the color code that you see up there, if you see a halo in green, those are the things that we already have in place. At the theater level, multi-domain task force. That is a joint enabler, theater enabling capability at the theater level. If you see something highlighted with the yellow halo, those are things that are pending right now, that are pending in terms of the organizational structure and the formations that we need at echelon. If it's red, those are things that we've yet to submit, but we know we're going to need it at echelon to fight. But the theater level, probably the most complex, but we have to set ourselves up for success at that theater level so they have access not only to national, but to joint assets as well. That's our echelon to ingest that and bring that all in. And then it's pushed to the core. According to our doctrine, that core, at the core level, is going to be where we can achieve convergence. Convergence is an outcome when you look at it very simply. But that's what our cores, and we have to set our cores up to be able to do that, to be able to leverage joint fires, access other capabilities, and ingest that and push that down to the lower echelons. At the core level, again, you will see those things highlighted in different colors, but bringing in protection brigades. How do we protect ourselves at large scale? Operational fires commands, as an example, engineer brigades. All those formations brought into the core level. And then we get to the division. You heard it multiple times yesterday. That decisive tactical echelon at the division. All of our echelons are decisive at some point in time. But looking at it in the context of this, that division is that decisive tactical echelon. So how do we now enable that division to deal with all that complexity? You pull a lot of enablers up from the brigades and the functional brigades to unencumber them is the goal. So your DIVARTIs now have all of your firing battalions. Your divisions start to look a little bit different in terms of how they're structured. We talk about strike divisions, or heavy divisions, strike divisions, our joint forcible entry divisions, IEW battalions, information, intelligence, electronic warfare battalions at the division level. So they can handle the complexity and you take that burden off of your close combat forces. That is our fight at echelon, and we can go into more detail on this, but those are the echelons in which we fight. So I go back to the point I started, Patrick, before I turn it back over to you. What is Army of 2030? fundamentally about organizational change, underpinned by a profound doctrinal concept, calibrated for large-scale combat operations. There you go. I said it twice. I'm done for today. Awesome. Just making sure you're awake. Patrick, back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Beeks. Hey, go to the next slide, which should be major trades between echelons. So, look, for most of the leaders in the room, the young people, as Beeks and I like to say, you're going to live your life over there in the right-hand side of this chart, inside of brigade combat teams. And, or, if you're not a maneuver officer, you're going to be in one of the supporting formations at that echelon. And that's a good thing, right? That's where we're grounded in the fundamentals of close combat, lethality, competence, and our commitment to the outcomes on the battlefield that are the foundation of who we are as a profession. But I'll say this, the investments that we need to make are across the entire spectrum of echelons, from the theater level through the corps, down to the division, down to the brigade, all the way down to the squad. The interconnectedness of those echelons is definitely the most significant. The increasing interconnectedness of those echelons is definitely the most significant trend that those of us at my age have experienced in our lifetime. When I was at Company XO in Desert Storm, there were very few things my company required from higher echelons in the short term tactically that I was looking for. Essentially, that came down to fuel, ammo, and repair parts. Almost everything else we could live without for quite a long period of time. And that's just the world we were in. We didn't expect a lot of intel from higher headquarters. We fought for our own intel, and we got it from our own scouts or from our own acquisitions or acquisition systems, targeting systems. I didn't care if the core network didn't work at all. It had no impact on my life whatsoever. There was certainly no impact from space capabilities, cyber capabilities, electronic warfare capabilities. None of that was present for duty inside of Alpha Company 332 Armor. So that world's over. We are now deeply connected at echelons where even at the platoon and squad level, you will rely and depend on capabilities that are resident at every echelon, all the way up to including the joint force and in some case partner capabilities. I think General Rainey is exactly right when he gave you the advice this morning that you fight with what you have and you make the most of every resource you've got. But we're building an army that gives you an unfair advantage so we can give you capabilities from all echelons and pile on at the tactical edge and deliver success. But when we look at the resourcing implications, we've got to make concrete choices about people and equipment, and we got to do it at each of these echelons. And many of the speakers that you've listened to have touched on that exact theme. Next slide, please. This is really an eye chart, and I don't recommend you even try to get your calculator out. Your HP 15C, if you're old enough to remember that thing, apparently it's made a comeback recently. This is the distribution of personnel in the active Army by branch. And the point of this slide is it changes. We've actually changed, and we've built new branches, and we've actually gotten rid of older branches, and we're going to redistribute personnel. And you've heard some of those discussions already come up. That's the Army changing and modernizing. And that's emotional. It's emotional at the branch level. It's certainly emotional at the individual level where different opportunities present themselves. But as leaders and leaders inside the close combat force, you've got to manage that change, and you've got to adjust those personnel requirements inside your formations, bring on new teammates, build new capabilities, and that's going to accelerate over the next several years. That's just the active Army. Same thing's true in the Guard and Reserve, and I'll talk more about that here on the next slide. And if you could go forward one, please. So I want to make a professional challenge to everybody here. We are a total Army. We in the active Army tend to talk about the active Army, the regular Army. We tend to talk about the brigade and divisional structure. But if you look at the totality of the Army's resourcing and people, We have almost 1 million soldiers in uniform distributed across the active Army, the Guard, and Reserve. If we're going to build the capabilities we need to build in order to be successful in the modern battlefield, we have to improve our total Army teaming and the delivery of capabilities at echelon. So, we're an Army, and I'll say it here for a second, we're an Army that likes to go to our own corner of the bar and hang out with people that we know and people who are in our branch and people who are in our unit. I challenge every one of you to find somebody that's not in your unit, not in your branch, not in your component, and go spend some time with them. Just say hi, get to know them, ask about their family, find out what kind of unit they're in. You're going to serve particularly when you do rotations and exercises in the theaters, you will be serving side by side with Compo 2 Guard soldiers and Compo 3 Army Reserve soldiers. Every one of you is going to deploy a formation through an A-pod or an S-pod, and you're going to receive that. You're going to have movement control teams and personnel accountability teams and cargo handling teams. And they're going to be wearing a patch from the SDDC, the Surface Distribution and Deployment Command, and you won't even know it, but you're talking to an Army Reserve soldier. They'll be incredibly competent. You'll have an Army Guard soldier standing right next to that Reserve soldier. They're incredibly competent, and they'll be expert in their craft. You'll be relying on intelligence production that is being delivered from a center here in the United States, manned by Army Reserve intelligence analysts. So my challenge to you is to develop a deep respect for other branches and other components of the Army early in your career instead of late, and start that relationship from a position of mutual respect and trust. Take the time to get to know the total Army, and you'll find there's all kinds of great people and great capabilities out there that you wouldn't have otherwise been aware of. So we're going to reinforce the teaming of the Army's concept, total Army concept, and those capabilities are going to be present at every echelon from all three components across the Army, and I challenge you to get to know them better. And on the last slide, I want to just briefly talk about modernization of Army training. General Rainey talked about this a little bit. General Flynn talked about it too. I don't want to give you a full history lesson on this, but our training model has changed and continues to change. General Beagle mentioned this too. Pre-1980, we largely had a live training strategy because that was the state of the technology. In the 1980s, we started to introduce live and virtual and constructive training, and we principally focused our live training at the brigade and below, and our constructive training at the division and above. You heard General Pappas yesterday talk about live training events at the division level and even some of the core capabilities. So that's why you see those divergent lines there in the modern training path. We're continuing to improve our live and virtual training at the small unit level, and that's incredibly important to maintain our lethality. There will be things that you can only do in a virtual training environment that you're going to want to train your teams and your squads and your tank crews, Bradley crews, and you challenge yourself to do that. You're going to continue to value live training as the single most important thing that you do, live fire training being the most important part of the live training strategy. But as you go up in echelon, you're also going to learn how to integrate different capabilities. So for a maneuver officer, for a combined arms leader, there's kind of two things we do, right? We either lead a formation train or we train a formation. And those two things are generally put together. But later in your life, you're going to be small group instructors, OCTs, training OCTs for the training support brigade. You're going to spend life leading a formation or building readiness in that formation, and you ought to learn as much as you can while you're young about all of the skills and the methods by which we do that at each of the echelons. You'll obviously start out at your echelon. You'll very quickly get pulled into other training environments as you continue to serve in the Army. So with that, Biggs, back over to you. I'm available for questions, and thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I'm ready as well, so bring on the questions.
While we transition to questions here, gentlemen, and wait for them to populate on Slido, I'll go ahead and kick off the interrogation. General Beagle, this question's for you. So you talked about CTC modernization and the criticality in the Army of 2030. As we move capabilities to the division level, can you discuss how the DIRT CTCs will account for the echelon training you had mentioned earlier, since CTCs are currently primarily focused on BCT level operations?
Yeah, and I think if General Pappas were out here, I mean, that will still be the focus at the BCT level, but just given some of the things that we know we need to do, how do you bring in a division and wrap around but not, interfere, with that BCT's rotation? There's certain things that we need those divisions in the dirt to be able to do. But in terms of modernizing at the CTC level, it is with regard to some things material, some things with regard to just the structure of the organizational aspect, and a bit of the scenarios, which again fall to ForceCom in terms of how they design those, to where our scenarios and how we design those things in order to achieve training and learning demands and objectives. ForceCom will make sure those things are set from the TRADOC perspective, is making sure that we have all the pieces in place at the CTCs. One example being emitters for aviation, and how do we replicate some of the things that they're going to see on the battlefield with regard to integrated air and missile defense, radars and things along those lines. I mean, the weaponry, miles. I mean, how do we get to next generation level miles so that, again, it's not just the old miles that we're used to, but it's miles that you can shoot from a 60 millimeter mortar, et cetera, and then they have an effect. They have an effect that we can replicate, in our DIRT CTCs. Patrick, I don't know if you had a double tap on that one.
Yeah, I concur with all of that. I think, here's the challenge I've stated, and General Beagle and I have talked about this extensively. We're going to be challenged both in terms of time and resources to deliver, and General Pappas talked about this yesterday, deliver the level of fidelity at the home station that we want to. So if we can't deliver everything we want to at home station across the entire Army, then we've got to be able to deliver it at CTCs, and for the mobilization forces at the MFGIs and major force generation installations like Fort Bliss, Fort Hood, Fort Liberty. So, we're going to have to make choices about where we want to focus our home station training on specific sets of skills. We're going to have to enhance the combat training centers so that we can deliver those training experiences at that level. And for everybody in the constructive and in virtual environment, we're going to have to make investments in those capabilities so you can get after specific skills, both tailored skills that you want to get after, like air defense, protection, or electronic warfare skills, and the combined arms capabilities that are necessary at echelon to be successful. We've got a challenge in front of us in training resources, and it's not just time, it's also our ability to prepare the training event, design the training event, and get after the training objectives that we all want to get after at each echelon.
Thank you, gentlemen, for that. The next question is going to go to the audience, to your front left, gentlemen.
Gentlemen, good morning. My name is Mark Jason. For some context, I currently work in the Army G-2 doing armor threat integration for modernization. And General Beagle, sir, you mentioned we have to get the CTC set right to support our efforts. So, gentlemen, where do you see the key terrain or decisive point in helping to advocate or prioritize the modernization of the OP4 or threat representation and equipment, sensors, and emitters at scale?
Yeah, so in terms of prioritizing, if I got the question right, I mean, it's high on the priority list. I mean, that's the thing that we have to, get right first. And we always, hear about, how do we fight and how do we train? I mean, my personal perspective in terms of the order of that is understanding how we fight, and then how do we train, from that point. But it is with setting the OP4, with ensuring that they know, they have an understanding of, what we will potentially face, and can we replicate that, at scale, which is a key part of all of this, is replicating it at scale. So, I mean, that truly, in that one tier one task that I outlined, I mean, that all is factored in terms of, everything that you just mentioned with regard to the OP4, vehicle sets, emitters. I mean, all those things that we need to be able to replicate consistently and better than, we're seeing around the globe, if that makes sense. So, Patrick, any points?
It's a great question. So I've got background in the resourcing side of our training support system.
that's awesome. Okay, all good. All on me. Good.
Well, while we wait for General Matlock to come back on, we'll transition to General Matlock. You back with us?
Hey, Patrick, he said that was a
Yeah,
great
I
answer.
am.
He
Can
said
you
that was
hear me?
awesome.
Okay, I'll keep it simple. We got a great team that's focused on resourcing training and training support. I asked leaders at Echelon, the vice and the acting chief yesterday asked us to write in our professional journals. It would be really welcomed inside of our resource food fight if the field gave a loud voice to those things that we need to be doing better in our training support systems, ranges, training devices, training environments, ability to replicate a competitive OT4. That voice from the grassroots level for training and advocacy for training is very important in how we do our business. Over.
All right, sir. While we still have you good on the net, we have a question for you from online. Sir, your slide earlier, you discussed the MDO requirements at Echelon. Can you describe what you envision some of the major differences may be from the Army of 2023 to the Army of 2030 with respect to MDO?
Patrick, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll jump in first and go back to you, Biggs. So there are lots. That's a good question and it's a complicated question. I'll start with the one that I think is the most prominent and is getting the most attention, which is the delivery of lethal fires from multiple echelons. So we as a joint force and we as an Army are investing in the ability to strike targets from long range and from multiple echelons. So in that distribution of capabilities from the brigade to the division to the corps to the theater, sorting out the roles and responsibilities and the focus areas to support what General Rainey talked about, the commander's concept of the operation for that particular fight will be a really important discussion over the next several years. And having the acquisition capabilities, the intelligence capabilities, the network capabilities that support the timely and effective delivery of the long-range fires will be a really important part of fighting at Echelon, more so than it has ever been in my lifetime. Second capability, the network and the intelligence capabilities associated. It's hard to distinguish between the network and the intelligence system, right? Those two things have to work hand in glove to make sure that you have the information that you need at your echelon to fight. So it is, getting space-based intelligence to you at the squad, platoon, company, battalion, brigade level in a timely manner will be a major effort that we all need to focus on over the next several years. That's just two examples. There's lots of other ones. Biggs, over to you.
Yeah, and I'll just go to, I wouldn't say the other end of the spectrum, but just slightly down the spectrum a little bit and think protection. So one of the formations that, highlighted in those echelons is a protection brigade. We've dealt with, MEBs in the past. We've kind of dealt with ad hoc ways of protecting, our forces at echelon, but then insertion of a protection brigade, what does that really mean? Protection is not just a 14 series problem. We think about foundational protection. I mean, what do you do at the base level? You heard, go back to the basics, but what do you do, just in your smaller, lower echelon formations? That protection bubble won't go across the entire brigade, the entire division, or the corps, but a key asset that we're gonna need and understand how to fight it and what goes into that protection brigade. You think air defense, capabilities that go inside of it and other things that will go inside that protection brigade. We can have the best, long range fires, the best sensing, but if we can't protect it, we're gonna shoot long range one time and then it's gone. General Rainey likes to say that, all the time, but we have to understand and get our arms around protection. So again, thinking through a formation that we bring in, why are we bringing it in? What is it designed to do? What is that formation for? And I know, by the way, that formation may not be able to do everything. So again, back to at Echelon, what are we doing at all levels to make sure that we protect ourselves and we're just better integrated? Those dependencies are starting to sync up. Over.
All right, great, thank you, sir. Going back to online for a question, this is with respect to warfighters. So how will the warfighter program adapt to train operational headquarters to achieve convergence of combined and joint MDO capabilities in a non-contiguous battlefield?
Yeah, so I think it's, and for those that don't know, I mean, all the warfighters at the Combined Norm Center on behalf of TRADOC, we do the warfighters for division and above. And the thing that we fundamentally need to change, and we know we need to change, is how it happens with regard to, virtual and constructive environments. So we have a system now. I won't throw out all the acronyms for those systems and how we do it, but they can't replicate everything. When you think, casualties, the scale of casualties, evacuation, the IEW effects, those type things can't be replicated as well as we need them to. We get them done, but we're gonna have to go to what we consider the next generation of STEs, synthetic training environment, so we can replicate those things, because we can't put every division corps in the dirt. Very hard to do, very expensive to do, but that's how we train. We do leader development through those division and corps level warfighters, but you need the platforms. The platform we have right now is good enough, but we need that to get better, but it's primarily gonna happen as we get to the next generation of synthetic training environment.
Thank you, sir. General Matlock, do you have anything to add?
General George mentioned it yesterday. The amount of preparation time to do the Corps warfighters and division warfighters has grown immensely. General Beagle and I can talk about that at length. We need to be able to deliver that training at a much lower personnel cost and time cost, not dollars. It's the time and the people that are too expensive. We need to be able to do that so we can get more reps and sets. And the second thing, in our core and higher level training program, we need to be more competitive. We need to have more challenging exercise design where, just to use an example, the CTCs, if you go out to a CTC and your wins and losses, you're probably going to have more losses than wins. We need to have that same culture at the higher echelon and at the joint level, so that we are.
I think we went pause on there again. Oh, we got him back. Okay, sir, I think we got the last part of that. We'll go to one more question. So this is for both of you gentlemen. With respect to modernization, we understand we're going to be modernizing at pace, but not everyone's going to be modernized equally at the same time. So how do we prevent the perception of the haves and have-nots across our force as we modernize?
Yeah, Patrick, I love your narrative on that, so I'll let you start with it, because you had a great way to flow through that question.
Hey, this is a really important question, and it's, we owe a level of capability to the entire Army and a commitment to the readiness of the entire Army. So sometimes when we come up with a brilliant idea to make something perfect and better, I look at it and I say, okay, congratulations, you've just modernized 1% of the Army and you've successfully trained 1% of the Army. Good, well done, good luck, and move out. So, we're not going to be able to modernize everybody simultaneously and at the depth that we want to, and we never have. Biggs and I have talked about this, so when I was a lieutenant in the 1st Cavalry Division, we had the oldest M1 tanks in the Army. I had 3 soldier tank crews for my first 12 months as a platoon leader time. I had a comp idler arm that didn't get replaced for 200 days because the priority of parts went to Europe over the home station. And we weren't actually expected to fight off that equipment. Our warfighting equipment sets were forward in, what we now call APS. I don't ever remember feeling like I was on a second place team. That unit trained hard. It was disciplined. We executed the entire training program. We didn't spend time thinking about what we didn't have. We spent a lot of time thinking about what we had and making the most of it. When we got alerted to go to Desert Storm, we took the entire division. And that wasn't an emotional crisis. We filled the holes that we had. We got that equipment that we thought we would never take anywhere in the world. We loaded it up, put it on a train, put it on a boat, and moved it out. So I just think there's a cultural shift where we need to spend less time looking across the fence line at the greener grass, and we need to stay singularly focused on being proud of the team that we're on, making that team the best team we can make it, trusting that over time we'll have plenty of experiences to get better and lead.
Yeah, Patrick, the only double tap I'll add to that one, and 100% agree with those points. But I mean, there's two things you can do in life, but you can't do them at the same time. You can wring your hands, you can roll up your sleeves, but you're not going to do both. Somebody in the back is trying to figure out how to do both right now, but you're just not. You're not going to do both, right? And so you can't wring your hands about what you don't have. I mean, if you go to war, we fight tonight, it's going to be with what you have and really figuring that out. And so exact same scenario as Patrick, me as a young lieutenant, I get to my organization, it's a heavy formation, and we had 113s, and everybody else has the Bradleys. But we weren't looking over the fence, wringing our hands. The thing that we relied on is we knew the doctrine, we knew the concepts, we knew the basics of maintenance, everything else, because we knew it was coming. And it's going to be the same as we modernize and we bring on those signature modernization efforts, organization change. It will come. It is coming. But if you're not ready to inherit it when it comes, then you're not done your work. You're not done your homework. And there's three pillars of leader development: what you're going to get while you're in the institution, what you're going to get from the force, which is going to be 80-90% of your time. That's where the learning really occurs. And then what you do on your own, that self-development piece. So when it comes, you can't start wringing your hands and go, oh, hey, boss, what do I do with this? Oh, you got it now. Figure it out, right? But it's all those things that you do that you can get better at with what you have. And so I completely agree, Patrick, with you. It's not a point to look at envy at a different unit. You have this, we don't have that. If the Army says go, we don't implore ourselves. Whatever combat command needs, they say go. Are you ready to go with what you have? And when you get new, are you ready to receive that? Over.
Okay, gentlemen, we're about 5 minutes left, so we're going to go into closing comments, but I'd ask if there's any advice that you gentlemen can provide for our company troop, battery level commanders, field grade officers, and NCOs who are serving now, but maybe at the battalion and brigade level in the Army of 2030.
Yep. So I will tell you, you will be at that level. I think Patrick and I both will be somewhere fishing at some point when that comes around. But that is my hope at the end of the day. When that Army comes, and it's going to be something I think the world has never seen when we talk about human-machine integration, AI, those type things that we've integrated not only into what we do on the institutional side, what we do on the operational side is being ready for those things. But it's putting in that work now with regard to what you do to develop yourself, the learning that is occurring here on the institutional side for those that are in courses here, and then how that learning transfers. I mean, we have to be progressive and sequential in terms of how do you go through, and we can't dumb things down. We're reteaching ourselves. We just got to get better over time, and that comes and starts with our leader development and training and development of others, because we will fight the formations at echelon, but it goes back to the people. How well are our people trained? How well do we do leader development? And if you wrap around what the Vice talked about, our profession, how do we steward that profession? And there's several components as part of that profession. Esprit de corps, honor, military expertise is one of those, and stewardship. How do we do? That is our profession. So if we get our arms around all that, there's nobody on the globe that we can't face and take down, given the leaders that we have, the formations that we're building, what we have in design, and what we're developing currently to get ourselves to 2030 and 2040.
Sir, General Matlock.
Hey, thanks, Beach. And first of all, pleasure to speak with everybody. And I wish you all the best in your professional endeavors and whatever the next steps you've got coming out of the program here, either as a student or back to your assignments, operational force. So that deep commitment to readiness, is just the standard by which we ought to live. General Rainey talked about it earlier. Every single day, you owe the Army.
I should have let him go first.
Battalion commander in the late 40s. For getting parts of supply. So
Okay, General Matlock, I think we're intermittent comms with you right now, but we'll close here. General Beagle, General Matlock, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to come speak with us today. It's been tremendously important about our Army of 2030 and the focus moving forward. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a round of applause for Lieutenant General Beagle and Lieutenant General Matlock.